So one more story for you. This is on November 13th, 1946. A guy by the name of Vincent Schaefer reached the culmination, really, of a series of experiments he'd been doing. He'd been trying to basically freeze his breath in a little freezer he had in his lab. And so he was making little clouds with his breath, and he was trying to seed them with different chemicals. This guy was a chemist, and he was trying to get them to create miniature precipitation. So, makes sense? So he's like breathing into this little freezer, and then he's like seeding his little breath clouds, if you will, and trying to get it to do that. Well, he finally gets one that works, and he ends up loading dry ice, is what ended up working, and he ends up loading that on a plane, about 6 pounds of dry ice, up on top of the clouds above Schenectady, New York, drops it into the clouds, and it creates this snowfall that went on, and you could see it from like 40 miles away. He actually seeded the clouds and saw this happen. Now, I've looked a little bit into it. There's a whole lot of debate today over does cloud seeding really work, but at least in this case, it appears that there was some cool stuff going on. And this final habit in our Win the Day series is just that. It's seed the clouds. We've talked about a bunch of habits, and I'm just going to briefly recap them for you. First, the big themes we talked about were bury dead yesterdays, win the day, and then imagine unborn tomorrows. And so bury dead yesterdays, we talked about flipping the script was our first habit. Our second habit was kiss the wave. Then we talked about win the day, and we talked about eating the frog was habit number 3. And then habit number 4 was fly the kite. Then we talked about imagine unborn tomorrows. We talked about cut the rope. If you remember that, we talked about a guy who cut the rope of this elevator and invented the elevator safety brake. And then last week we talked about habit 6, wind the clock. And most of these we have up on our church YouTube channel if you want to go back and find any of these if you missed them or anything like that. And today we're going to wrap it all up with this final habit, which is seed the clouds. It's all about getting a picture of like a God-sized vision of the future and then doing now what you can to make that happen. And I'm just curious, just by show of hands, how many of you believe that God has something big in store for your future? Like you're hanging on to that, you're hoping that, yeah. Okay, almost all of you, except for like 2 of you who are like, no, man, this is about as good as it's going to get. That's okay. That's all right. I appreciate the realists. But what we're going to do is we're going to look at one of the key things we can do to seed the clouds to bring that future to pass. And I wonder, have you ever had a time where you begged God in prayer to do something? Like you just laid it out there for him and like, God, I really need to see you work in this area. I really need to see this happen. Today we're going to look at the story that Daniel read earlier from the story of the prophet Elijah, of his prayer and kind of this amazing thing of literally seeding the clouds and this rain that comes about. So it's in 1 Kings chapter 18. If you've got a Bible or want to open a Bible app and take a look at that, we're going to be in 1 Kings 18. And I want to give you a quick overview of what's happening here because I'm going to give you some background. I'm going to skip a big part of the story that we often talk about, and then I'm going to talk about the end of the story. So you kind of got to know all of it, or you're just going to go, what are we talking about? So first of all, there is a king this is the northern kingdom of Israel, and a king's name was Ahab. Ahab was married to a woman named Jezebel. Jezebel was a terrible, evil, rotten human being and dragged Ahab down with her. And he was a very wicked king, being highly influenced by his wife, Jezebel. Now, Elijah was a prophet at the time. It was a rough time to be a prophet, and Elijah had prophesied a drought which was afflicting the entire land. There's no rain going on at all, and now the region is experiencing just the effects, the devastating effects, really, of this lack of rain. And here's where it picks up. So 1 Kings 18:1 says this, after a long time, the word of the Lord came to Elijah in the 3rd year. Go and present yourself to Ahab. I will send rain on the surface of the land. God's telling Elijah, hey, I want you to go tell King Ahab, it's going to rain. Like, it hasn't been raining. It's been terrible in the whole region. There's going to be some rain now. And what we're going to see happen later in the passage is rooted in this promise right here about it's going to rain. There's going to be this rain. But here's what happens in the meantime. Elijah goes against some prophets of Baal. In the land of Canaan, there's 2 primary false gods. And so when you read the Old Testament, you'll see these come up a lot. There's Baal and there's Asherah. So a lot of times you read about Asherah poles being chopped down and stuff if you read through like Kings and Chronicles and those books. those were the two principal deities of the land of Canaan. So that's who they were supposed to be clearing out every time God's saying, clear out all the idols, clear all this out. A lot of it was Baal and and Asherah. So there's 450 prophets of Baal in this situation in 1 Kings 18. 450. There's one prophet of Yahweh. His name is Elijah, the guy we're talking about. And here's the challenge that happens. They go up on this mountain, and they're to place two bulls on some wood for a sacrifice. They build up the wood like they're going to offer a burnt offering, and they're going to place it on there. They're each going to ask, the prophets of Baal are going to ask their God to light it on fire, and Elijah, the prophet of Yahweh, is going to ask the one true God to light it on fire, right? This is the challenge that's set up. So Baal's prophets, they build their little altar, they stack up the wood, they put the bull on top of it, and they start calling on Baal all morning long. Nothing's happening. Elijah starts mocking them around noon, around lunchtime. He's like, hey, maybe your God's thinking it over. Maybe he wandered away. Maybe he fell asleep. He's just giving them all sorts of grief for what's going on. And so they start to crank it up. They shout loudly. They actually start cutting themselves, and they're bleeding on this scene. It's a little bit of a gory scene. And all this stuff is going on all afternoon long. And the Bible says, but there was no sound, no one answered, no one paid attention. Nothing happens when they do that. So now it's Elijah's turn. They've been going all day. He's like, all right, my turn. He gets up there, and he douses the wood with water, not one time, not two times, not three times, but 4 times. So just dumps tons of water on it, which is, of course, going to make it less likely to burst into flames spontaneously, which, in my mind, it's difficult enough to just call down fire from heaven, let alone throwing some water on this. So Elijah douses it with water, offers a simple prayer. God lights the fire instantly. All the people recognize, here's the true God. All these prophets of Baal, they go down in this valley, and they're all put to death, all 450 of them. So then we pick up right after this has just happened. So remember this whole chapter. It's going to rain. Then we got this challenge, Elijah versus the prophets of Baal. The one true God wins that challenge. And then now we pick up back to that promise of rain. And here's what happens, verses 41 and 42. Elijah said to Ahab, go up, eat and drink, for there is the sound of a rainstorm. So Ahab went to eat and drink, but Elijah went up to the summit of Carmel. He bent down on the ground and put his face between his knees. I love here that Elijah is declaring there's the sound of a rainstorm before any sort of rain is happening. And we're going to see in a minute how there's really not even any rain in the distance yet when he says that. But he's so confident that he knows what God has said is going to happen. And when we're talking about being on this journey to win the day, it's not about being more productive for ourselves or what we can get done in a day. It's about having this confidence in what God has said. When God has spoken his truth to us, when we know his promises, when we know what he wants to see accomplished in us and through us, we can have the same type of confidence where we say, oh yeah, it's sounding like rain, even though you're not even seeing it yet. Now think about Elijah's prayer posture. If you look at verse 42 there, he's bent down on the ground, and he's put his face between his knees. He is in a place of humility and mourning and prayer and just crying out to God. And our physical posture can do a lot. It doesn't motivate God more. Let's don't get into things that, well, if I lay flat on the ground, God will be moved more, and then that means I'm more spiritual somehow. But sometimes it just gets us into the right position. Have you ever been worshiping through music and raised your hands when you didn't feel like it? Sometimes you raise your hands because you feel like it. You're like, oh man, I love Egypt. This is a great song. But sometimes you don't feel like it, and you choose to raise your hands. If you've ever done that, what you may have noticed is sometimes that shifts, your physical shift in posture changes your spiritual posture too. And so prayer can do that. So physically sometimes it can be a good thing to change our physical posture. To sometimes bow on our knees in prayer, to sometimes get on our face in prayer because of what it does to our heart and the position it puts us in spiritually. So Elijah he's heard God speak of this rain that's coming, but he's willing to put in the effort of praying to ask God to bring the rain. He's still willing, I'm going to ask God to do this. I'm going to ask him to do this, because I know that we're really quick sometimes to kind of put together our own plans and then ask God to bless them, We're like, God, I planned this great thing for you. Please bless it. Like, well, that would be really awesome if you would just bless this plan that I put together all in my own energy, all in my own strength, all in my own ability. So sometimes we do that. We make our own plans. We ask God to bless it. Other times we just kind of give up and pray about things, but we're not really willing to do any of the work. We're like, okay, God, help me to share Christ with this person. And then we're not willing to open our mouths when it comes out. Or, God, give me a heart to serve people. And then you get an opportunity to serve, and you go, I don't really feel like that right now. That seems kind of inconvenient. So it's both things together. But think about this. When was the last time you prayed to God with this type of posture like Elijah has? Whether you're talking physically or just a spiritual posture, just that place of saying, God, I'm humbling myself before you. I need you to do this. I need you to act here. You see, Elijah was seeding the clouds with his prayers. And we do the same thing. We seed the clouds with our prayers. There are times when we need to commit ourselves to praying at a different level for God's work to be done. Now, there's a time and a place for short prayers. I'm all about, short prayers at mealtime because it means that your food's still going to be hot, and it's not going to be like, oh, I got to go stick this in the microwave now. What? You prayed too long again. Come on, Before a test, short prayer, hey, I'm all for it, This week, I started out my week last Sunday. It was here for church, and I was here Sunday night, and I had this toothache that was starting up, and I thought it was like a sinus thing and a toothache, and I don't think I shared it with everybody, but I shared it with a couple people. I know I talked to Brett about it, I think, and man, it was starting to just bug, and I was like, okay. And so I went home Sunday night, went to bed, and slept terribly, like worst night of sleep I'd had in years, just awake half the night. I'm hurting. I think I slept like maybe 5 hours or something, and I went to bed at a decent time, but was just waking up every hour and just laying there like, this hurts so bad, like my whole face was starting to hurt. So I decided, of course, though, because I am male, that I was going to tough it out and go to work and just take some Tylenol. So I did that, and I went to work, and I went and got lunch with somebody, and I was having lunch at Which Wich, excellent sandwich place. And I'm having lunch. I'm not really enjoying my food because I'm having to chew everything on the right side because my left side of my face was just hurting. And so I'm chewing over here. I'm talking with this guy, and I come back to the office, and I had a meeting, and I'm just like kind of half in the meeting, and then I get done, and I'm like, I'm going home. So I just drive home. It's like 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Pull in my garage. I walk in the house. I was like, hey, hon, I'm here. I'm going to bed. And I just like went straight upstairs. And then I hear her announcing on the Alexa in our house, because we have, I don't know if I've told y'all, but we have Echo Dots literally almost everywhere. They're not in the bathrooms, but you could talk from the bathroom and it would hear you. They are like everywhere in my house. So we are very frequently saying, Alexa, announce, it's dinner time. That's just all the time in our house. And we have conversations, and it's a bit of a mess. But anyway, so my wife announces it's dinner, and I'm like, no, I can't eat. I don't even want to eat. So but the last thing I ate was my sandwich and fries at Which Wich Monday at lunch. And then I go to bed, and I slept, off and on that night. Get up the next day, I'm like, I can't go to work, so I'm going to stay home, but I think it's my sinuses. So I'm like doing everything I can to like clear this stuff up. And I'm doing, have you guys ever done a neti pot? Anyone ever done a neti pot? All right, if you don't know it, I see some quizzical looks. So I'm going to explain to you the joy of the neti pot. So a neti pot, I've had 2 different versions of a neti pot. The one we have currently is a little plastic bottle. You fill it with warm water and a saline solution, and then it's got this little cap and a little kind of spout and a little plug. The plug goes in one of your nostrils, and you turn this thing upside down. It's got a little button on the bottom, and basically, this is gross, and we're recording this. It squirts water up one side of your nose, and it cleans out your sinuses, and everything comes out the other side. All right, it's gross, right? So I did that over a couple days. I did that probably 3 or 4 times, and it was just making it worse. I felt like so. Finally, I'm like, oh my gosh, like this is terrible. And so I go to the dentist Tuesday afternoon, and I didn't want to because I didn't think it was an actual dental thing. I go, they did this really cool 3D x-ray, and so sure enough, they're like, oh, you had an infection right there. Here's some drugs. I'm like, thank you. And so it all starts feeling better. But when I was in the middle of, all I could do, it was one of those things where I felt so bad. It was such a tiny thing. I felt so gross that I would like, it would take all my effort to send a text message. So I'd be like, I'd look at my phone, I'm like, oh, I should respond to that. Like, text, I'm like, okay, I need a 2-hour nap. And then I would just sleep for like 2 hours. That was like my day, like Tuesday, most of the day Wednesday, just laying around doing nothing. I wasn't even getting to like watch movies or something. I didn't want to look at a screen because I had just grossness feeling. But I remember, especially that first night, when I said I was just awake almost all night and just laying there, lots of short little prayers. I remember lots of like, Lord, help my tooth. Lord, this hurts. I can't do this. Please stop. Please make the pain stop. Lots of short prayers. So I'm all about short, quick prayers have a place. But there is a time when we have to take it beyond a short little prayer, and we have to just carve out some time and say, okay, God, I'm going to devote this to you in prayer. And I'm going to be consistent with it. I'm going to have a humble posture, and I am going to fully commit this to prayer. You know, sometimes we expect God to do incredible things in and through our lives, and we don't ever engage him in prayer. Like, we're not actually pressing in through prayer to ask him to show up in a powerful way. So it is absolutely critical. And Elijah was in that mode of prayer. And then after he'd done that, he decides to look for the results of that prayer. He doesn't like go first and check it out. He prays with that heart and that posture. Verse 43. Then he said to his servant, go up and look toward the sea. So he went up, looked, and said, there's nothing. 7 times Elijah said, go back. So this guy's like, he's like, hey, go look, go check it out. See if there's rain. The servant runs over there. No rain, comes back. Elijah, there's no rain. Okay, good. Go check again. So he goes back. No rain. 7 times. And the reason he would go look over the sea was that in Israel, the rain would typically form from the Mediterranean Sea, and it would start with just a little bit, and it would become darker and darker, and eventually fill the sky, and then the rain would come in off of the water and move east. So he keeps sending him there to look. And I wonder how many of us are willing to persistently pray and believe in this way. Like, I'll give you maybe, like if I was Elijah, I might have sent my servant 2 or maybe 3 times. I don't think I'm sending him 7 times. I think I'd go, all right, that's enough now. Let's calm this whole thing down and let's just come up with an alternative plan. You know, I don't know that I would have sent him 7 times, but he keeps sending him there over and over. His faith was so strong. And here's what happens in verse 44. On the 7th time, he reported, there's a cloud as small as a man's hand coming up from the sea. Now, just think about that for a second. Cloud as small as a man's hand. At the distance he was at, he's a ways from the sea. He can, like, hold his hand up. He sees a cloud, holds his hand up, he can block it. You got all this other sky out there and stuff he sees, but the hand is blocking that little cloud that's out there. So it says, then Elijah said, go and tell Ahab, get your chariot ready and go down so the rain doesn't stop you. I mean, I love this because earlier he's like, there's a sound of a rainstorm. There's nothing going on, right? Now there's a little cloud out there, and he's like, ooh, you better go because the rain is going to stop you. Verse 45, it says, in a little while the sky grew dark with clouds and wind, and there was a downpour. So Ahab got in his chariot and went to Jezreel. The power of the Lord was on Elijah, and he tucked his mantle under his belt and ran ahead of Ahab to the entrance of Jezreel. So that's interesting right there, too. This chapter has some incredible miracles. First, there's the fire from heaven to light the sacrifice. Then there's rain after there had been no rain for years. Finally, there's supernatural speed. Elijah, whether he's like busting in front of the chariot way like faster, or he's just kind of keeping at the same pace right with it, and he's just kind of slightly ahead. The distance to where they were going to Jezreel is 25 miles. Now, let's just assume, I did a little bit of research on chariots this week, and I was trying to figure this out. I had a hard time finding an exact mile per hour. So we're just going to go with, because I found some stuff on Roman chariots, but we're going to go with 30 miles per hour, okay? Let's just assume the chariot is moving at 30 miles per hour. It's impressive to think that Elijah could keep up a 2-minute mile for 25 miles straight. That's fast. He's just booking it. And I love it, the picture too. He tucked his mantle under his belt. He's like getting all his like robe stuff, and he's like, all right, let's go. And he just starts just charging and just racing ahead of him. You see, God's sovereignty is all over this story of Elijah. God stopped the rain. God provided the fire for the sacrifice. God brought the rain. And then God enabled Elijah to run in this way as he empowered him. You know, at the end of it all, winning the day isn't about you having a more successful life or career. It's about allowing yourself to join in with God and his story. You know, he's in control, and he allows us to be part of the story, and we get to see him do some amazing things. So, you know, just think about it. What's the dream that God is calling you to seed the clouds about? Maybe God's calling you to a new level of spiritual growth and maturity. Maybe he's giving you a new ministry assignment. Maybe he's asking you to leverage your skills and talents for his glory. You know, one thing I know is anytime you have a season that shifts, and right now we're ending the kind of the end of the academic year for most of you, and you know, you're going into like a summer season. You're going into a time where it's different. It's slower, or maybe you're working, and it's just different. Anytime you have that, I want to encourage you to use that season, leverage that season as a time to just lean in to what God may want to do in that time. Here's the big idea for this habit is and this message tonight is this: sow today what you want to see tomorrow. Sow today what you want to see tomorrow. If you're going, okay, God, I want to see you do some incredible things. I believe this is what you're telling me and leading me, so I'm going to pray in this direction. And not only am I going to pray in this direction, but I'm going to maybe have a new attitude of humility in approaching it. Or maybe I'm going to commit to obey you, God, in the daily small things that are going to help take me there. And I'm going to do the work that is required. But I do know that God wants to do some amazing things through every single one of us in this room. And it starts by winning today, and then winning tomorrow, and then winning the next day. So let me pray for us, and then we're going to sing together and then kind of continue on with our time together.